Hello, everyone. Welcome to Everything Band, a podcast that features conversations with composers, conductors, and performers of music for winds and percussion. My name is Mark Connor. I'm a composer and educator, and each week I have the good fortune to speak with and share the stories and wisdom of musicians and leaders in the band community. The Everything Band podcast is a proud member of the Music Teachers Development Podcast Network. The Muted Network provides support in the form of audio-on-demand programming designed by and for music educators. You can find more information about our network at mutedpodcasts.com. Before we begin, I'd like to thank Jake Walker and Colin Peters for their contributions to the show, and especially to all of you who are listening. I appreciate your time and hope that you are finding value from these interviews. I rely on word of mouth and social media to bring the show to new listeners. If you think you know one or two people who might find these interviews useful, please let them know about it. You can also help by following me and sharing posts on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube. Remember, help your students live up to the best that is in them through music.
And now on to our next guest, Josh Johnson.
Hi, thanks so much for having me today.
For our listeners, you are hearing a different voice leading today's interview. I'm Jake Walker, our show's creative director. No, I didn't lose any bets to Mark. I'm just happy to be here to feature a really outstanding guest today on our show. Josh, could you tell the listeners a little bit about yourself?
My name is Josh Johnson, and I am a middle school band director. I work in the western suburbs in a suburb called Oswego. It's the last one before the cornfields, and it's located about 40 miles outside of Chicago. So there I am co-teaching with Rachel Maxwell, who's a great friend and dear colleague of mine. We have jazz band there and our concert bands. We start our beginners in sixth grade. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Josh, if you want to tell us just a little bit, maybe what do you do at Traughber Middle School on a daily basis? What does your teaching schedule look like and some of the highlights there?
Absolutely. So at Traughber, Rachel and I co-teach everything. However, the seventh grade I lead and she assists, and then eighth grade I assist while she leads. And then with sixth grade, we have individual homogeneous classes. And so just depending on the class, I may teach one or Rachel may teach the other. So typically, I will teach the beginning clarinets and the beginning flutes, and then I'll also teach any of the beginning low brass, whereas Rachel will teach the beginning trumpets, and she'll teach the beginning percussion, and then she'll also help with the beginning clarinets class as well. Jazz band, we have extracurricular outside of school. Usually we meet once or twice a week. And then we've got, at this point, after COVID, we've got about 300 kids left in the program. Before my first couple years there, we had over 400. So it was quite a bit. And just with some smaller classes coming in and COVID and online band, we have seen some numbers drop down, but still pretty healthy numbers up there.
Yeah, so that's actually a conversation I want to touch a little bit about. So you mentioned the program state after COVID here. So we're now in the summer of 2022, and we're all trying to continue to look forward beyond the pandemic and how do we kind of rebuild our programs, especially those programs around the country that might have really taken a hit there. So what are some things maybe that, you are doing in your program or that you're kind of having discussions with Rachel about? To grow the program and kind of get it back on track to where you saw it before the pandemic hit?
Yeah, well, I think there's a couple of things that you have to kind of look at. And I don't know, depending on the kids that you have in front of you, I feel like this answer could go a number of different ways. But for us, we tried to particularly think about the kids' experience. So think about what was it like playing online? What was it like doing X, Y, and Z? Like we understand that those are some of the things that were not favorable to us or to kids. But just taking a moment and reflecting on those moments with the kids and then having them kind of understand as they come back, wow, like it is something that like we're not taking for granted now. We're not just 6 feet apart even when we do come in, or we're not wearing masks, or we're not doing this, now that things have kind of gotten a little bit back to normal. I think the kids have a deep appreciation for it. So I think the first thing, first and foremost, is making sure that you're making authentic connections with the kids and making sure that you are able to have conversations with them and you're able to understand things from their perspective. And I think a lot of times as band directors, myself included, we're so type A that we are pretty like, this is this and this is this. But I think we sometimes forget what it's like to be on the other side of the seats. So I think all of those things, just being aware of what kids go through and having those open and honest conversations, because the reality is things still aren't quite normal. But at the same time, I think that if we do want to get back to some sense of normalcy, we also do have to make sure that we're spending the time and investing in those fundamentals, and we are making sure that we're not even just getting frustrated with, we're just reteaching and relearning and trying to make sure that we're all just on this journey. And I think that's kind of where I've gotten to, not to get all deep and stuff, but I've kind of tried to take a step back and look at things for what they are. I think oftentimes we get so like, this is such a big deal, and we get so caught up in the moment. So just taking a second to kind of step back and relax and prioritize all of the other things, I think has really helped.
Yeah, I think that's a really big point that you're talking about. The fundamentals, I think that, most band directors are having to go back and really focus on those fundamentals and those beginning things, even with the older kids, just to make sure that everybody's on the same page, because we just know that everybody's experience during COVID was very wacky when you're doing it virtual, and you don't really know until you get back in the classroom, and then you kind of rediscover those things that were actually taught and learned when you get in person with everybody. So I agree with you. That's a really big factor into it. Let's kind of back up a little bit here. How did you get through your experiences in music? So let's go back to maybe your very first day of band, or how you joined band and picked an instrument. Let's kind of talk about that experience. What brought you to music as a student?
Sure. So I will say that neither of my parents are very musical at all. My mom sings in the church choir, and that's kind of what my first experience was just kind of seeing how my family loved music in a different way. And eventually, when middle school came around, I wanted to do band, and I actually started later than some of my friends. I started in seventh grade. And so I started band in seventh grade playing on the saxophone. And from there, we had the high school band director were coming in and kind of help. We just had one band director in our middle school, even though the program was huge at that point. And so we actually got a new band director at the high school, and her name was Dr. G. For those of you guys who know Dr. Gustafson Hines at O'Fallon. And she came down to the middle school, and her and I just automatically hit it off. That was in eighth grade, I believe, and I switched over to play tuba because nobody else wanted to, and I was trying to be the lone savior of the band, I guess. So I switched to tuba for my band director, and she ended up coming over and helping. And then after that, I just kind of got sucked into what band was and kind of fell in love with the culture. And I went on to high school, and I actually did quit band for a semester. And Melissa kept pounding me, when are you coming back to band? When are you coming back to band? And I actually told her never. I told her, I'm not coming back. I was like, I'm done. And then the next semester, I actually went back, and that kind of changed the whole perspective of what I thought I was going to do in life, and where I thought I was going to go. And um, just having that group of friends and having an organization that was really dedicated to developing people and trying to be the best. Like that was just something that I think I learned a lot from, and so that kind of was the start of it. And then just from there, just a lot of great musicians, a lot of great teachers along the way.
Awesome. And what school did you go to for middle school and high school?
Back in the day, I went to Fulton Junior High. Now, those middle schools, if people are familiar with O'Fallon middle schools, that top band that goes out and plays a lot of places, that's actually between two middle schools. But when I was in middle school, that was I was the last class where it was just one middle school, so that's called Fulton Junior High. And then I went to O'Fallon Township High School.
I found your story to be quite interesting because you mentioned that you actually quit band for a brief period of time, but your colleague Rachel also said that she did too. When she was on the show, she talked about how she had that same experience, and she was, virtually saved by coming back into the band world, and look where you both are today. So I find that story to be really funny that two really great directors both had a similar experience where you didn't know if you were going to stick around or not, but thankfully you did.
Well, and the thing with Rachel in particular that gets even kind of weirder and a little creepier is that so Rachel, Melissa, my former high school band director, is actually her former roommate from college. And so when I was fresh out of college, I was going to the Phantom Regiment show at Boylan Catholic High School in Rockford. And it's usually a big alumni event. And I marched in 2015 and 2016, and Rachel marched in the late 80s, I believe 88, 89, and maybe 91 or something like that. And so we actually officially got to meet at the Phantom Regiment beer tent and hit it off. But it was because Melissa had told us, you guys need to meet. And so we've got that in common too. It's like a weird mix. Like we both quit band, but we like met with the same person. We both marched drum corps in the same corps. It's a very weird mix of coincidences.
That's a really great story. So you got up to high school, and what ended up being your primary instrument? What would you say is the instrument that you play mostly today?
I actually switched again from saxophone and tuba and everything else I played in between to oboe. And Melissa is an oboe player, so I took lessons with her. And oboe is what stuck. So I stayed with oboe. I played oboe through college, went all the way through, still playing oboe quite a bit. But that's where I ended up going. So again, another weird coincidence. You don't really hear of many band directors being oboe players, and so here we are.
Okay, so then at a certain point in your musical journey, you obviously discovered that you wanted to major in music. When was that?
I think that was somewhere around my junior senior year of high school. I originally, as an elementary school or late elementary, early middle school kid, I don't know what other elementary, middle school kid dreams this, but my dream was to be a congressman in some way, shape, or form. Maybe it still is at some point. I don't know. But I again, I think just like junior, senior year and having so many teachers that influenced me, and then particularly band and having that outlet, I was also just really involved in high school. So I was student body president, and I had a couple of other big groups that I was a part of that I really invested myself in. So I think just seeing what those organizations did for me, and then the people, the teachers on the other side of it who helped foster those communities and kind of helped foster that those cultures like that also kind of really opened my eyes. I think I'm very much so a people person more than anything else. So anything to do with people was something I was very interested in.
Okay, so during high school, you kind of figured out now you're playing oboe, you realize you want to start majoring in music, and then you're starting to make those decisions and thinking about college. So, what brought you to the University of Illinois? What kinds of things influenced you, and what did you find special about that program?
Honestly, if I'm being very, very honest, the reasons why I went there were John Dee, the Oboe professor at U of I. I had gone to ISYM, and I had been studying there with him for a couple of years at that point. And then the other part of that was actually Dr. Robert Rumbelow. He had come to O'Fallon quite a bit, and he had like written a piece, and he was hardcore recruiting for me to come there. And so I went to the open house, and I heard them in Cranard, him conducting the Wind Symphony. They were playing Overture to Candide, and I believe it was the first movement of the Hindemith Symphony. And we had just had some student teachers from there that I really liked, and so it just kind of seemed like the natural progression. My other high school band director, Mr. Harris, Sean Harris, he was best friends with Barry Houser from Smith Walbridge. So it also just kind of seemed like a very natural tie to go there with just knowing some of the faculty and those kinds of things. And I'm going there, and it was a one of the best decisions I could have made.
As I know you mentioned being in drum corps. So, for those of you who are listening who might not have ever gone and seen an actual drum corps show in person, that is something you need to do. That's an absolute must.
Yeah.
And so, I guess my question for you is what made you want to do drum corps and how did you get involved?
That's a good question. So again, not to just keep relating things to high school, but O'Fallon, as of lately, has definitely reached new heights with the level of marching band that's been there and all those things. But one of the cool things about it is back to when I was in high school, like the very first time the marching band made semifinals at Grand Nationals, I was a junior. So being able to kind of see that progression has been awesome. And at the same time, I felt like I was really a part of that culture at O'Fallon to kind of go from pre BOA, like going hardcore BOA, to like kind of investing into what that stands for and that whole championship and that whole circuit. And so for me, when I went to college and I experienced Big Ten college marching band, it was just a different experience. Not that it was better or worse than what I had experienced, but it just wasn't what I was accustomed to. And so for me, I liked that competitive edge. I liked kind of that aspect of things. And so with that being said, I started looking and deciding like, okay, well, what do I want to do? Do I want to end up doing this or do I want to do that? And so when it came down to was I ended up going in 2014, I went to world championships with a good friend of mine, Phil Carter, and we watched drum corps. And I kind of had in my head for a while that I kind of want to do it, but I saw Phantom Regiment, I saw the other corps, and just with the proximity and the nature of the beast, and I knew I wanted to be a drum major, and there were so many other things that went into it. So I ended up picking Phantom Regiment. And just it's weird because from every point of my life, like there are all of my closest friends or some of my fondest memories all stem to some chapter of band at some point, and drum corps is no exception to that. Some of my closest, dearest friends in the world are all from Phantom Regiment or drum corps.
Yeah, that's a really powerful thing, is to be able to connect with many different people, whether it is in that competitive aspect of marching band or it's just in your own, your own level at a middle school or a high school, and you're working with colleagues and sharing ideas and just being involved with each other, I think makes really, really strong personal connections. So that's really powerful to hear you talk about the drum corps experience and how that helped boost you up even more as as a musician and even as an educator.
Absolutely, yeah. Drum corps, I feel like the great things and the not so great things, both of which really had a profound effect on me as a teacher, and like as a person. Like honestly, I think at Phantom Regiment, those couple summers when I was there, that's where I really learned to grow up. Like that's all the responsibility that we had. It was just like that's where I learned how to be responsible for other people.
So you were marching drum corps while you were in college, correct?
Correct. I did 2015 and 2016. So I think I auditioned either my freshman or sophomore year in college, and then I went through until leading into my senior year, and then I decided not to return. Then I had one more summer I did not return because I was graduating.
So after your college experience, like many people, you start looking for jobs, you start finding where that next step is going to be in your career and where you might end up. So you talked a lot about how you grew up. You are not originally from the Northern Illinois area. You are from down in Missouri. So what was that like for you as you were leaving college? You were going to school in Illinois, and you started looking for your first job. So where did you end up?
Yeah, so I actually, I do say St. Louis when people ask me where I'm from. O'Fallon there, and there's an O'Fallon, Missouri, and there's an O'Fallon, Illinois, both of which are on the just the opposite side of St. Louis. So I am from Southern Illinois originally, so that's how I'm connected in Illinois, and decided to go to U of I. And coincidentally, O'Fallon is only like 15 miles from Missouri, from the border. And so when I ended up teaching and coming out of school, I ended up teaching in Missouri, right across the border, over on the suburbs on the Missouri side. And so I taught in Kirkwood, Missouri, for 2 years. And I there was also co-teaching with a big staff. I think we had at that point in time, there was myself and three other full-time band directors across three schools. And then there were another, I think, three or four part-time people that kind of floated in between. So it was a very large staff. And so I did that for a couple years. And then after I got done with that, I came on up to Traughber.
Okay, so for viewers or listeners like myself, I'm a younger music educator. I just finished my third year of teaching, and one of the biggest topics that we like to think about is what are some things that maybe you learned in your first couple years of teaching there? So at your first experience, so maybe some positive things, or maybe things that you wish you would have done differently now that you've moved further along in your career.
Yeah. I think the one thing that I did learn that was a great thing um, right away was if you feel like you need help, it's okay to ask for help. And you sometimes I think we talk in our own head that we don't really have a backup system of some way, shape, or form. But in reality, we do have that system. And so I think a big part of me becoming who I am today as a teacher and a person has been asking for help and reaching out, especially for some of my mentors. And so I made it a habit and I made it a point to make sure that as our kids were preparing for things, I would bring people out, whether they were from the University of Illinois or if they were from another place, either in Southern Illinois or Missouri or whatever the case is. So making sure that you understand and that you're okay with admitting that you don't know everything. And if you don't know something, I will come back tomorrow. I will make a phone call this evening and I will figure it out from one of my friends smarter than I am, and I will come back with an answer tomorrow. So I think that's probably the biggest thing is just that. And I guess the other, if I can say two things, would be when kids come in the room and something ends up going off script or off from what the original plan was. I think the one of the biggest things I've learned is 9 times out of 10, it has like almost nothing to do with you and something to do with whatever happened before they even came in the room. And so just keeping those two things in mind, I think have really helped me um, kind of stay grounded and just stay calm, especially in the midst of all the craziness of the past couple of years. I don't know how anyone could have gotten by without asking someone for help at some point.
Right. The flexibility was such a big thing that teachers needed to have, and I think we didn't have a choice. We were all forced to be flexible. Um, so that's a really good point that you brought up there. Okay, so after 2 years then you made your way up the road to Oswego, right?
Yeah, and I had student taught up in the suburbs. So as I was preparing to come up here, like it wasn't a completely foreign thing. I was kind of aware this is where I wanted to be at some point in time. So it just kind of naturally happened to be at that point. But yeah,
Where do you see your program going forward?
for sure. Well, I will say we have kind of kicked it back in gear. I think we're kind of, for the most part, going back full swing as we were before COVID. Um, but within that, I think we are figuring out how to work smarter, not harder. And within that, as we looked at next year, we were trying to figure out some things, and even this year, like what are some things that we can do that the kids will be excited about, that we could still learn and grow from. It doesn't have to be a competition, but what can we do to kind of make this exciting? So the end of last year, we went on like an overnight trip with the eighth graders and went to Six Flags, and it was crazy, and a clinic, and all this and this and this. And so as we looked at this year, the upcoming year, we still want to do some of those things and keep it fun, but I'm not going to say the other groups that are going yet because I don't know who else publicized it yet. But we are looking at doing a special trip this year, and we are actually going to be renting out Orchestra Hall and doing a concert at Orchestra Hall with a couple of dear colleagues and a couple of high school programs here in the suburbs.
That is really awesome. I think that's going to be an experience that students will be looking forward to. And that's another big thing is just how do we get students to be excited after COVID and some of the experiences they went through, because it's nice to be back in the classroom and making music again like we were used to, but it almost feels, and I don't know what your thoughts are on this topic. It almost feels like even though we're back, there's more of a push that we have to make to get those kids engaged and just motivated to want to stay and play music. So
Sure.
ideas like that, just getting to travel and getting outside of your classroom, I think are probably going to be more beneficial than what we've seen previously.
Oh yeah, I mean, and obviously, there's so many things that go into travel. There's so many logistical things, and obviously, there's still COVID, and there's still this, and there's still that. But again, one of the points that I mentioned earlier in our conversation is just thinking back to what are the kids thinking in their heads on the other sides of the chairs. And as much as it is about the music, it is about this and that. at least for me, they're still 12, they're still 13. Like they still want to be like wild and goofy and they still want to go do X, Y, and Z like they're kids. And so at the end of the day, we want the kids in our seats. We want them to play in band, but then they also have to want to be there. And I'm not saying that we should motivate them purely by trips and this and that, but kids, I feel like when you invest in them and you care about them and you care about the whole kid and not just the kid that benefits, you know, who's going to play the solo or who's going to do X, Y, and Z, the kids have they stick with it, they're with you. It's like a different level of just interaction and music making. And so I think just trying to always put that relationship first and always trying to think about it from the kid perspective, and we've all been there. So I guess my point that I'm reiterating is just, if you hold the course, you think about it, you try and make kids excited and engaged and having fun with it, like those things will come.
Yeah, I like what you said about, talking to the kids and getting to know them and being, you want to be able to understand what they're going through. So can you kind of talk to me a little bit about an experience you've had with a student, or just some kind of way where you connected with a student that really needed that extra connection and you were able to really help them in whatever way, whether it was musically or just improving as a person and just being a support?
Sure. I don't know if there's even like one particular instance. There's been quite a few as of lately, and this is something that I'm pretty passionate about, and it's just that sense of diversity and equity and inclusion and all those things. And so with that being said, there's a lot of different kids that come for a lot of different reasons. Some kids it may be a musical thing, some kids it may be a home thing, some kids it may be I don't know who I am thing. There's so many different pieces that go into each kid. And so I guess for me, I don't want to say there was one particular instance with one particular kid, but I will say, as we went forward with COVID, and there was a point where there were some teachers, when we were delivering on some days that we had some free time, we would go and deliver free the school lunches to kids. And in Oswego, we see, you just think it's like your typical suburb, typical middle class suburb. But then you see some instances of this extreme poverty where there's like no actual front door. It's a piece of plywood, you know. And so when I saw things like that, or just some of the personal issues that kids have come up, or just seeing kids who are now transitioning into, or trying to find this level of acceptance, and you know, eh, it just made me really prioritize, or made me shift my thinking a lot, and just me personally, like trying to sift through how I feel on an everyday basis and trying to be aware of my feelings and my emotions. Like, to me, especially right now, for the foreseeable future, that has to be the number one thing that comes first with kids. And I will argue that down until, the last breath that I have, is just that until you have like a solid, genuine relationship, and until the kids really know that you care, like you've got nothing else, you know? And so you've really got to stand on that. And so the people who say that they're about that, hopefully like these 2 years have really shown you, if you have been about kids and that way, and knowing what they need and how to be the allies for them, versus just thinking of the musical aspect of things.
Yeah, it's certainly been tough, and we're seeing all different things in the classroom over the last couple years, and it feels like it's continuing to go on, and if it's not one thing, it's another thing, and it really feels like we have that obligation to help those students, and hopefully you and many other directors who are listening are finding ways to help those students who really need it. And I think it is something that, it takes time. We have to be able to work through our issues, and we have to be able to find those solutions for the kids. And at the end of the day, we're always going to be there for them. So some really great thoughts that you shared.
Absolutely.
So we were talking a little bit about, the student motivation factor, trying to get students that want to stay engaged and get those really exciting experiences. So can you tell us a little bit about what it was like working with different composers and commissions? Because we know that Traughber Middle School Band has used many commissions before. When I take a look at your website, I go through that list and see a lot of pieces of music from a variety of composers that got very popular, and you had the opportunity to present them at your school. So what's it like to have a commission and getting to showcase a composer and bringing it to your students?
Yeah, and it just depends on the situation and the kids and the group that you have in front of you, and what the meaning behind the pieces are. And so, what I've experienced at Traughber, the first one where we've really been able to go super in depth into it, or at least have the composer come in, was with the honor band that we had. We just had a commission with Dave Biedenbender, who wrote a new piece for us, and he came out and he came down and he talked to the kids about what the piece meant and some of the aspects compositionally, and that was a very, very, very strong moment. And even though at Traughber, Rachel has done a wonderful job, and that's something she's really, really passionate about, is commissioning new work. So I haven't really had the opportunity at Traughber, but I have done some works of some different friends who have actually met from drum corps, who are into composing. Will Pitts is a good friend of mine who does some compositions, and so I have been able to have that experience with the kids too, of being able. Well, first of all, the kids think that you're some kind of like band celebrity, which is kind of cool, especially the middle school kids. They're super into it. But anyway, and so especially, I think there's this one time, separate note. I think there's this one piece Rachel was playing at one point, and the kids wanted the tempo to go faster. And I think it was a Brian Balmage's piece. And it was like 108 was the tempo written. The kids wanted to go like 120 or 112 or something like that. And she's like, no, it's supposed to be written at this piece and this is tempo. They're like, no, it isn't, blah, blah, blah. So she like calls him like in class at that moment. And he's like, hey, our kids think that this piece is supposed to go at this tempo. And he's like, no, it's supposed to be and the kids are like, oh, what the heck? Dang. So they're like all upset about it. Like, we think it sounds better like this. And so it's also just kind of, of course, middle school, seventh grade boys
Yeah,
who think they know it all. I
absolutely.
mean, it's a new level, I think, of kids taking ownership of their learning and what they're doing, and I think they invest and they just have a little bit of extra give and buy into it. And so I think when you do have the opportunities, especially if you do, even if you don't know the person very well, but if you do know the person very well, it's really great. Even the process with Harrison, we did commission something with Harrison, and that whole process was fantastic, and just kind of working together and seeing our initial conversations of wanting it to be X, Y, and Z, and just seeing how it blossomed into something that's completely different is also kind of a cool experience.
Yeah, I really think it's exciting when you can get a chance as the teacher to kind of step away from your own ensemble and let somebody else take it so that you can kind of absorb what's actually happening. Sometimes we get up there and we're making music and we're teaching all the time, but we don't actually pay attention to certain details until we kind of step back and take the pressure off of us.
Oh yeah,
So
man,
it's something that's nice as the teacher getting to have that experience too.
for sure.
You did the Neo Consortium, right?
hmm Originally, when we were in conversations with Harrison of writing a piece, I think Rachel wanted it to be like she loves like some English folk song theme of variations or something like that. It was just like, okay. So Harrison was like, all right, I'm about it. Sure, let's go with this. So then George Floyd got murdered, and then she's like, maybe I shouldn't suggest it being about in English. You know what I mean? Kind of folk song. I'm like, okay. And so as we kind of sat and talked about the project, um, it all kind of just stemmed from my Rachel and I having a lot of conversations of how the world is just a little bit different than sometimes how we perceive it to be, and just all that came with just the aftermath of that. And so we decided to kind of try and collaborate to where we had different types of art. So it was more than just the meaning and the purpose behind the piece, which is beautiful and it needed to be said. But it was also trying to collaborate with different artists from all over, from different perspectives, to be able to come together and to put something together for all of us, to say that we are against this, and we feel strongly that we have to figure out how to do better for society, how we can be better people, how we can do that. And from those different artists, there was different perspectives. Like Harrison's was from that of a person of privilege. So he was writing about how can I, as a person of privilege, how can I acknowledge the wrongs that have happened and how can I be a part of the solution moving forward? And then we had like a visual artist who portrayed, he grew up in Chicago as a Black artist. He portrayed all the things that he saw living in Chicago. And we had another person who did a multimedia project portraying like how she felt what it was to grow up being Black and some of the differences in that of America. And so we also tried to put together some lesson plans so that when teachers went and talked about the whole project and started having some of these uncomfortable conversations, that they can do so in a way where they understand the material, in a way that is appropriate for the kids that they're serving, and all those things. So it was a big project, but there was such a huge turnout and such a huge, overwhelming support of the project, and people just being really grateful for everything that came with it and the conversations they were able to have and the change that they were able to start in their programs.
Yeah, that's something I was going to point out is there was a lot of schools that joined into your project, and I think that that probably felt really good knowing that there's people who care and are passionate and want to bring that awareness, and that's something that that we really need.
Absolutely.
And with that note, I know that you have been busy presenting at a couple different conferences, especially this last year. And one of the sessions that you've been presenting is called "Get Comfortable with Being Uncomfortable: Being an Ally of Our Students." Can you talk to our listeners a little bit about what it was like to present at not only Midwest this last year, but you were also presenting at our state conference here in Illinois, and kind of give us a little rundown. What was that? What was it like? What was the reception?
As I, again, as a lot of things happen with me, I try to be as organic as possible. And so, as this kind of came to fruition, it was New Year's Eve, and I was reading a band. I don't even know. This sounds so weird to say, and I don't even know how to say it in a way that doesn't sound nerdy. But on New Year's Eve, I was laying in bed as instead of watching TV, I decided to look at an emotional, like language, like ESL book that also incorporated like band fundamentals and music fundamentals. I was looking at a book. And as I went through the book, there were some things that I saw that were a little troubling. And so I emailed the person just like, hey, I just want to get your perspective on things. And here's kind of where my mind went and just trying to get some questions. And that conversation, while it went fine, it was kind of like, okay, but you still don't get the point. And so within that, as I was talking to Professor Houser, it kind of was like, I think I'm going to just have some little presentation at the state conference where I put something together and I just talk about, like, okay, how can we look at these things and not tokenize certain groups and just be inclusive? And that's kind of how it originally started. And I think within like the first week or two, I made like an 80% draft, like a slideshow. It was like it was long. Like 80% of the presentation was done. And as I was sending it to Professor Houser, Barry, to look at, I was like, hey, let me know what your thoughts are. He was like, dude, this looks awesome. I think you should also like send this in the Midwest and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, I mean, I guess it's done. So I don't know why not. I might as well. And then I remember one day I was like watching TV and I took a nap and then I woke up and saw I had an email from Midwest and I threw up for like an hour. And then I was like, all right, well, I guess this is what we're doing now. So that's how it all really happened. And then you fast forward to December. The reception and just the response people had to something that I just saw as, well, let me just do some reading and watch some TED Talks and watch some documentaries and read this scholarly article. And I'm just going to put together some stuff I see and just, like that's all it was to me. And just to see how people reacted to it and just to see how much it sparked conversations and just being asked to do other things as a byproduct of it. That was never the intention, but I just, when I left that room, I guess I felt as if, or any room, anytime I presented on any of these topics, I felt like, well, if one person heard what I said and took it seriously and at least is trying to make a difference, then how many kids does that affect? And then when you see a room full of people and you're not even like, there's people that care about what I have to say, like my opinion on how to be a better person and how to be a better teacher and ally for kids. Like there's this room full of people that I don't even know. And just to see, how it changed their perspective or changed their thoughts on things and how they can be better for kids. And, it was just, it was powerful. It was a very humbling and powerful moment.
That's really awesome to hear. I know it had a lot of great reception on social media. People have been talking about it. There was a lot of excitement leading up to both of those conferences, from what I could tell. So, just it is a really complex thing, and you know this really well. And it's
It
it's
is.
it's hard to educate people, and it's hard to present it in a way where people will receive it in a way that is actually useful for them. So it takes a lot of work. So again, that's something I want to give you credit for.
Thanks, man. I appreciate that a lot.
All right, so now we've come to the point in the interview where I'm going to ask you some closing questions. And as Mark would call it, this is his enlightened round. This is not rapid fire, but this is an enlightened round where we'll ask you some standard questions that we ask all of our guests on the show to answer. So, my first question for you is, where do you draw the line between healthy and unhealthy competition?
Yeah, and this is a this is a hard one just because again, my background. Well, here's the thing. I think that you have to understand and the kids have to understand that at the end of the day, I always feel like there is so much safety in preparation. Like I know at the end of the day when I walk on the stage, there's something else I could have said, there's something else I could have done. We just need to have a good run at that point. And I think that our kids are very accustomed to what that feels like, knowing, okay, to a certain degree, we need to have a good run. There are things that can happen, but I think that's part of it. The second aspect of it, in that same regard, is saying that you can't control anybody else but you. So at the end of the day, to me, I'm not going to say I'm not competitive. I'm not going to say I don't enjoy competition. I'm not going to say that there aren't some ways to make it to help like the strength and the level of the program that you have. But I think when you get caught up in just that and not having the kids understand that life happens and you can't control anybody else's preparation or what how they do, that kind of eliminates that for me. And so in just building that culture of like, it's more so about you wanting to go on there and do the best that you can do because that's what your best is. And it's not just like a washed out thing. So I think those are all kind of the same thing in a way, just focusing on you, I guess. You can't control anybody else.
Okay, so my next question for you is, how do you find work-life balance?
Yeah. So, and I know this one, I probably talked a little bit more about the social emotional aspect of things than necessarily any specific band things, but that's also just representative of where I am in life right now, too. And so that question of just that work life balance as in a career and as a teacher, as a band director specifically, it is hard no matter what level you teach at, whether it's middle school, high school, obviously the more time commitments in high school and et cetera, but that's just the nature of the beast. And so for me, when COVID happened, and as we kind of got back integrated into it, just to be open and vulnerable and honest for a second, as we were going back into school, I've never necessarily been an anxious person, but I've always been pretty type A. And I started having like pretty drastic panic attacks. And they were happening mostly at night. And I like sleep at like 68 degrees with a fan on, like and I would like wake up sweating and my heart was like, I was thinking I was having a heart attack, like I was dying. And it was actually panic attacks about just like going back to school. Like, how are we going to play and be 6 feet apart and masks and bell covers and this and like all that. And so it got into a point that and just some of the other things of just life in general to where it had just gotten so overwhelming for me to where I feel like I was really losing myself. And so within that, now as I have gotten past things, like I said, I am very type A. I am that to, the nth degree. But I've also learned that sometimes it is just not worth it. And sometimes you have to just do what's best for you. And so I am very, 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 very big on being for me. I have kind of become way more introverted than I have. I've always typically been very extroverted, but kind of secluded a little bit more. I like to go hiking, go out in nature, hang out with my puppy. So, there are some things. I started a vinyl collection. I love that. Like, I love listening to vinyls. And so I have found some things, but all of it really has just been prioritizing how I feel and really acknowledging that and not running away from it.
Okay, here's our next big question for you, Josh. What are the challenges facing music education and how can we best meet them?
Okay. Well, typically I am a very straight no chaser type, but I'm going to be a little bit more Disney Channel and just say that I think, in a way, it all just centers around, I guess, some of my frustration sometimes is when you get so bogged down. I love the music just as much as everyone else. But again, as I've said this whole time today, is just when you lose sight of the kids that are in front of you, um, and not necessarily you're prioritizing the music because, well, this composer, like, some people just get so far into that, and I just don't think it's ever that deep. They're 12 to 18, you know what I mean? Like, at some point they still have to be kids. And so I guess one of the things that I've realized, especially coming out of the pandemic, one of the more pressing things is trying to be a little bit more on the social emotional side, is trying to just take a step back, even if it's just for 2 minutes. It's okay to take a step back from band for like 2 minutes in rehearsal. How are you guys doing? Talk to your neighbor about, like, give him a high five. That was a great rep. Give him a high five. Okay, let's go back. Just like those small little interactions between the kids and you and the kids. I think that, to me, is a huge frustration, something that music ed needs to continue to look at, like moving towards this more globalized thought process of, and I'm not saying that everyone isn't, but for band in particular, like, how can we still achieve and get like these high results, but how can we also invest more on this side of things where kids are really struggling socially and emotionally?
All right, next question I have for you is what advice would you give your younger self?
um I think really in any context it kind of just goes with it. Just be patient, and the right opportunities will present themselves to you, and just be open to, I think I got what I've learned was I got so caught up in trying to plan everything out, and I will do this in 5 years, and I'm going to go to this school, and I'm going to do this, and blah 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 blah. And sometimes, even if those opportunities present themselves to you, that's not the way life happens. And so for me, like, learning how to be able to uh, go with the current of wherever life is taking me and not resist to it, and just kind of make the most of it. I think that's kind of been um, the thing that's helped me the most. Just kind of understanding what I have and just problem solving.
Right, there's a lot of things that happen to us that are beyond our control. We never know what's actually gonna happen within the next it almost feels like tomorrow, right? Like, before we would say, "Who knows what's gonna happen in a year or 2?" But now it's, "What's gonna happen tomorrow?"
Now it's literally tomorrow. Yeah, and that's the thing. It's like if you get too caught up in, like, 2 years ago or 2 years from now, it's like, dude, yeah, but, like, I can't even think to, like, the next hour right now. The kids would be, in some regards, they'd be like, well, what are we doing, like, in, like, the Tuesday the 27th, and it's like the first. I'm like, I don't even know what I'm doing next period. Yeah, you know what I mean? Like, I'm still trying to, like, wrap my head around, like, what's happening in front of me right now. And so just go with it. I think that just leads you to a happier life. Just whenever life happens, no stress, just figure it out.
Yeah, and as you said, you talked about how you want your students to just be kids, just be themselves and get to experience those things. So sometimes it's kind of hard to go back and try to tell our younger self something when honestly we are, you're a kid. When you're in high school, you're still going through all of those changes and things that are going on in your life that you don't know what's going to happen. So, it's good to take it day by day. It really is. So that's a good answer.
It is. And and that too, like you said, just that that long-term planning, or just like let kids be kids. I think to a certain extent, like we want to give this advice, like we want them to not make some of the same mistakes that we made, or whatever the case is, whatever the case of situation. But at least in my experience, that falls on deaf ears until you've had the experience to like be able to make the decision. And so my grandma used to tell me all the time when I would do stupid, dumb stuff. And she would tell me not to do X, Y, and Z, or trying to tell me a better way to do whatever. And she would say, "You'll hear me now, but you'll listen to me later." And she said it for many, 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 many years. And I had no idea. I just was like, what? But then now, as I got older, like all those things that my grandma used to tell me, like now I've got the experience, like the life experience to be like, if I would have just not resisted and went with it and did this and just, I knew better, but I was just too stubborn to do it. And once you kind of figure that out, I think you're just like much happier because nothing throws you.
And how many times have you seen, former students or just older students come back to their band director and go, "Man, I wish I would have listened to you back then when I was in sixth grade band or seventh grade," and just share those experiences. So that little quote you just shared right there, I think will hit will hit the spot for a lot of our listeners, and just thinking about, yeah, we've all been there. We've all either done it ourselves, we've gone to our teacher and said, "Hey, I appreciate you now. I didn't show it when I was your student, but." We're thankful. So,
Yeah, absolutely.
all right. My next and actually my last main big question for you. If you had a choice, what would the final piece of music be that you could conduct?
Wow. That is a hard question. I have so many pieces that I um really, 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 really love. And I also know this is kind of like I'm darned if I do, darned if I don't, because someone's gonna have an opinion about what I say. So I'm just gonna say it. I think it would be Armenian Dances Part 1. I'm not even gonna lie to you. It is just one of my absolute favorites. I don't know if you're familiar with the term these youngins say now, and by youngins I mean me. I forgot what I was gonna say also, so that's great. There it is. It always hits. It never misses. Armenian Dances Part 1. You heard it here first. Never misses. Every single time I've heard it, it gives every time.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on this question because like I said, these are some of Mark's questions here that he asks all of our guests. So if you were conducting this piece, where in the world are you going to conduct it?
Where in the world? Oh,
Yeah.
Armenian dance. Oh God, I I don't know. That's a hard question that I was really not expecting. The Armenian dances one, I kind of had time to think about. Uh, I I don't know. I've got nothing. I've got nothing. I don't know. Anyway,
I was just curious to see if you had like a place, like if you're saying, Carnegie Hall or a certain place that maybe was special to you, or, maybe it would be at your middle school auditorium or something.
dude, we did it in the nastiest gym. And like we had it was rough until the freshman campus got built, and then it was like, okay, but the sound's terrible. U of I, I've already done it. So I mean, dude, I don't even know. Wherever, just plug me down somewhere. It's fine.
Oh, that's a great answer. All right, Josh. So far you've had a really awesome interview, and I hope our listeners are enjoying it. Do you have anything though that you want to share or promote yourself?
Not necessarily. I kind of am, especially now, I'm kind of the type to just kind of be more in the background. I just kind of like, just kind of doing my own thing and just whatever. There's not necessarily anything that I really want to promote myself on. I feel like I'm just kind of the same as everyone else, just trying to make it through the best I can. Hopefully I'm starting graduate school in the fall. I'm kind of waiting for all those things to kind of finalize and shake out, but I'm really excited. So soon I'll be able to announce all that stuff, hopefully. But I'm looking at that and I'm really excited. And so, yeah.
Okay, and then how can people get in touch with you?
Okay. Well, Facebook, or email is good. My school email or my personal email, both of which are up, and I don't know if there's anywhere to really post it within this, but I'll go ahead and say that my school email is jjohnson02 at sd308.org. And then my personal email is Josh period Johnson 1207 at gmail.com. Or you can find me on Facebook too, any of those things. If you want to talk DEI or kids or band or beginning band or whatever the case is, I'm more than happy to talk.
Thank you so much for being here today, Josh.
Thank you so much for having me. Thank you, thank you, thank you. I really appreciate it.